The short-term let industry was originally a way for people to rent out their spare rooms or houses to intrepid travellers who wanted to stay somewhere more authentic and cheaper than a hotel. But once real estate investors started to see the success of companies like Airbnb, they were soon buying up housing stock to cash in. Our local communities now suffering as a result. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Critics of companies like Airbnb say millions of potential homes have effectively been removed from the long-term rental market and turned into hotels. The unintended consequence is that in popular tourist areas, some locals, especially younger ones, can no longer afford to live near their families and friends. And the backlash is very real.
In some holiday hotspots in Britain, like Devon, central Edinburgh and the Lake District, between 20 and 25% of all residential properties are listed on Airbnb, the biggest name in the short-term let industry. The government is now planning restrictions. However, the issue is just as acute elsewhere. There have been protests in Mexico City and Colombia. 2024 Olympic Games host Marseille has joined criticism of Airbnb being allowed to sponsor the event. New York's attempts to stop the spread of Airbnb has led to multiple lawsuits. Barcelona's ban on rentals of less than 31 days was overturned by the Supreme Court in 2022. Venice and Florence are launching the latest attempts to impose strict regulations. Airbnb says it welcomes regulation that protects communities and cities, but are locals who are being priced out of their own areas buying it?
Well, let's discuss this with today's panel. In the studio with me, I have Merilee Karr, Chair of the UK Short-Term Accommodation Association and CEO of Under the Doormat. On Skype from Gwynedd in Wales, Craig Iago, applied Cymru councillor and cabinet member for housing. Great to see you both. I'm going to come to you first, Merilee. I read a newspaper column recently and the headline said, Airbnb is abominable until I need it. Doesn't that kind of sum up the whole kind of situation with short-term lets?
Look, I would actually argue that short-term rentals is beneficial for most people who encounter it. For consumers, it gives them choice. Imagine as a family, when you used to have to travel and squeeze everyone into a hotel room, now you have a choice to stay in a home. And for homeowners, it allows them to earn an extra income. And especially in today's cost of living crisis or with raising interest rates, it can help people actually afford or stay in their homes. And let's not forget the benefits to local communities, to local businesses, and also to the taxman. I mean, the industry in the UK alone represents 27.7 billion. That's a huge industry. And along with that, close to 500,000 jobs. So we talk about the challenges, of course, that come along with it. And we have to work together between industry and government to overcome those challenges while, of course, making sure that people can benefit from what the industry brings.
Craig, you're in one of the biggest counties in Wales, Gwynedd, £27.7 billion. It's a staggering amount of money. How much of that filters down to a local level where you are?
Yeah, I'm not sure any of it does. I don't know any billionaires or millionaires. So, I think that I agree with most of Merilee's points, and really, it would be hypocritical for most people to say they don't like Airbnb or that type of stuff because we've all used it. I think the problem becomes when it becomes an industry. Instead of people sharing their homes and allowing people to stay in their homes, people start buying homes and turning them into Airbnbs. So they're no longer homes, they're Airbnbs. And we're now in the perverse situation in Gwynedd where we have no homes to rent anymore. They've all turned into Airbnbs or that sort of stuff. Yeah. And so it's now cheaper to just rent an Airbnb. So if you need to move house, move into an Airbnb for a prolonged period of time because it works out cheaper than just renting a home.
The English Liberal politician Tim Farron, Liberal Democrat, he is based up in the northwest in a beautiful area of Cumbria in the Lake District. He's been very outspoken on this recently. I want to read a quote from him. So Tim Farron says this: in Elterwalter, in Langdale, 85% of the properties are second homes. Without a large enough permanent population, villages just die. The school loses numbers and then closes. The bus service loses passengers, so it gets cut. The pub loses its trade, the post office loses customers, and the church loses its congregation, so they close too. Those who are left behind are isolated and often impoverished in communities whose life has effectively come to an end. So, is short-term lets killing local communities?
I mean, look, even he has said that the issue is around second home ownership. And I think we sometimes bring these two things together, and they're very different issues. Even before short-term rentals came onto the scene, lots of communities were suffering from hollowing out because there weren't jobs locally, there weren't opportunities for local people. And so that isn't caused by short-term rentals. And I think that's something we've got to be clear about. What short-term rentals does is it takes what would be otherwise an empty second home and provides 6 times more income to the local community than an empty second home.
But you're still denying a local person a home.
Well, I would argue that the problem with homes and having available affordable housing is, again, a separate issue. Government has missed its housing targets year after year. The problem of affordable housing is we are not building enough affordable homes. If the government would simply deal with the, the brownfield sites and the planning permissions that already exist, that would be over 500,000 new homes. And that's far bigger than the industry that we're talking about. So I think we have to be careful not to pin the blame on short-term rentals for bigger issues. And look for how our industry is actually helping to overcome some of these issues by creating jobs and opportunities in those communities that otherwise were actually headed already in a direction of being hollowed out.
Craig, what Tim Farron said about communities dying, are you seeing any evidence of that across Wales?
Undoubtedly. And I think a problem with the show maybe is that I'm just going to agree with everything Merilee says. So
you must be angry though. You must be angry about it.
It's enraging, and it's worse than enraging. We've moved one step beyond. We're now giving up hope because there doesn't seem to be an answer. But as Merilee says, it's not the fault of short-term rentals. In a healthy economy, in a healthy housing market that was regulated, and there were enough houses, and that we built enough houses, then this model, this business model about renting your home out would be an important part of the economy, a healthy part of the economy, especially in somewhere where I live, where we don't have great jobs that earn a lot of money, but we do have this beautiful scenery that everybody wants to come and visit. And yet, but again, we have this resource, but we can't do anything with it. All we can do is try and stick sticking plasters on a problem, a housing problem that is exacerbated by short-term rentals, but certainly not the cause. This housing crisis is not caused by short-term rentals, nor people seeking to supplement their income through this business model. But until we regulate it, until we do something about it, undoubtedly, I agree with what the Liberal Democrats said. I see it in my own village. Houses. I'm a post-industrial area. I live in a post-industrial area that is not typically people don't come here to visit us, but now every third house is an Airbnb. It's the death of a community.
So let's just take a look at just how big, for example, one company has got, Airbnb. They dominate this industry. They dominate the conversation. Let's look at their statistics. So last year, 2.9 million hosts on Airbnb worldwide. 14,000 new hosts joined the platform each month of last year. 100,000 cities worldwide with active Airbnb listings. 220 countries and regions with active listings last year. So Merilee, those statistics are incredible. I mean, any company would be proud of those figures. It's an unstoppable juggernaut. I mean, year on year, it just keeps getting bigger, doesn't it?
Well, it does grow. And short-term rentals, as you're aware, isn't just about Airbnb. But they are, of course, the brand name that people are most familiar with. But I think it comes down to the fact that there are opportunities for owners, you know, and the reason that it's growing so quickly is because owners need to supplement their income. And this is one way they can take that asset they've invested in and earn an income to support paying mortgage payments and, you know, and their families. And so that opportunity to spread tourism to areas that have never seen it before means that also consumers are experiencing different places and living like a local, getting to come and really experience what an area is like. And I think that authentic tourism is something that we see as a big trend. So I think the challenge is you're not going to take away the demand either from the side of the owners of the properties or from the side of the consumers. So then it's about how government and industry work together to get the balance right and make sure that you don't have unintended consequences as it grows.
Craig, how frustrated are young people in Wales who can't get even on the first rung of the property ladder because greedy landlords are hoovering up everything to turn them into short-term lets?
Yeah, it's we constantly have marches and rallies here. You know, in the last few years, a few new protest groups have been established by young people. Like I said, it's now gone beyond anger. It's now like giving up. And I've got 3 young kids, and that's not the future I want for my kids. Is one that's filled of anger and despair. What we need to do is we need more houses. We just need more houses, and we need to regulate the houses we have now. And Airbnbs should be an important, healthy part of our economy. But at the moment, what everyone wants to do is point the finger at them because that's what we see as the problem. The actual problem is a lack of affordable homes. As Merilee said, before we saw this upsurge in short-term lets, 60%, over 60% of every single person in Gwynedd could not afford one single house in Gwynedd. Now, so the problem existed beforehand, but now we have something to point at. So I welcome the fact that we're now discussing things like this on programs like this. That's brilliant. But we need to make sure we focus on the lack of affordable homes rather than turning people who are just trying to supplement incomes, well, a certain percentage of them anyway, through creating short-term holiday lets.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, Craig, because earlier on I spoke to the former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, and he told me it's the less well-off that are losing out. You know, places like Edinburgh, tourists from all over the world flock to Edinburgh, the festival in particular. Airbnb can be a godsend, but there's a big backlash from locals because young people can't buy an apartment. They can't get on the property ladder. Where do you see it sit on the whole issue of Airbnb in cities like Edinburgh and Glasgow?
Well, the only solution is to build houses. You know, Scotland probably doesn't have as huge a backlog of house building as there is, for example, in areas in the south of England. But it's still a very substantial difficulty, particularly for people trying to establish their first home. And therefore, probably after the health service and sorting that out, the most important social issue to address is the housing that's required by the people. Now, it's been done before. You know, back in the 30s, Scotland pioneered the development of massive social housing. And I see no reason why that can't be done again, because there are a few things more important than allowing young people coming through to have a proper start in life, and that means to have their own home to raise their families.
Merilee, he's got a point, hasn't he? Alex Salmond, former First Minister of Scotland, there saying that governments need to be doing more with affordable housing in the first place.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Governments need to be having housing targets that they actually meet rather than setting them and throwing them out the window, which seems to be the standard that we're seeing here in the UK. what's really frustrating is that rather than targeting and solving that problem and building new homes, what they're actually doing is then saying, oh, well, we're just going to pander to this political minefield, which is saying, oh, well, we'll just regulate short-term rentals because that will solve the problem. And I think that's a misnomer. You know, in the US, they've done research, and Oxford Economics has shown that short-term rentals is only a drop in the bucket. It is actually the COVID pandemic combined with the lack of house building that is causing the shortage of housing and the lack of affordable housing for people. And I'm as frustrated as anyone is with a young son. I think, well, I want him to own a home one day. The only way that's going to be possible is if we build more homes and make it affordable for people to buy and get on the housing ladder. And I hope that the government can actually see that as the true problem to solve.
Craig, where do you stand on the whole issue of people even getting tax breaks in this industry and, you know, more money for, some would say, more greed?
Well, it's not greed, is it? I don't think it's greed. I think it's we live in a society where we need to make as much money as we can just to stay afloat. And it's sort of like expected that you're going to take advantage of economic opportunities. For me, I think the problem is that we have allowed this free market free for all that just basically empowers really wealthy people, and so we don't regulate because regulation is bad. We don't believe in society anymore. What's important is money. Money's important. So we've turned our houses into investment opportunities rather than homes. And we're living out the consequences of that. Of course, in order for house prices to keep going up, we need to make sure we don't build enough homes that meet the demand. So that's happened too. The only thing I think I would disagree with what Merilee has just said is that whilst I don't believe Airbnb or those short-term holiday lets are the problem. In certain places like where I live, it's very much a problem, and it doesn't matter how many houses we build. If we keep building homes here and we don't regulate them and make sure that the ownership is controlled, people will just buy them as Airbnbs and then Airbnb them out. Because at the moment, you can get the same amount of money back from 10 weeks of Airbnb-ing your property as you would by renting out throughout the year to someone local. So although they're not the problem in certain places, that's definitely how it shows up. So we need to regulate it. While I agree with Merilee, we also need to build homes.
Craig, the UK is looking at a general election next year. Obviously, cost of living is going to be a huge talking point still. Your party, Plaid Cymru, Welsh nationalists, do you think you would maybe embed into your manifesto for next year perhaps regulation of short-term lets and second homes in picturesque parts of Wales?
Well, my party is rightly obsessed with homes, yeah, because nobody in Wales can afford to live and feel that they have live in a secure home, and that's the absolute fundamental of society and the fundamental of life. Without growing up in a secure, safe, warm, all those environmentally sustainable homes, we're not gonna thrive. We don't have a viable future ahead of us. So my party is rightly obsessed with homes, and we are succeeding in certain places. For example, in Gwynedd, we have managed to persuade our government, the Welsh government, to undertake a pilot in one part of my county that's going to target all the measures we can think of in order to sort of regulate homes in that part of Gwynedd, with the idea of it spreading out throughout wherever we want to in Wales.
Merilee, you're originally from the United States. Just talk us through how it works there. I mean, have we got similar issues in places in America?
I mean, to be honest, I think the issues are common globally. So, you know, in North America, you see similar types of issues arising. And I think there are a couple of things to really understand when we talk about what to do about it. I think everyone agrees that some regulation is required. But the first thing to get good regulation is to get data. As an association, as an industry, we support a registration scheme to get good data so that any regulatory choices that are made with the right information. So we don't end up with unintended consequences of over-regulating and then having people lose their livelihood or having a local area lose the tourism to people going and traveling internationally because they can't find accommodation in the places they want to visit in the UK. So you start with registration, and then I think beyond that, once you know in a particular area that there's a bigger issue, then you can actually start to look at, well, what do you do beyond that? Whether that is nightly limits, whether that is taxation. An empty second home provides 6 times less value to a local community as one that's rented out. So if you're able to tax second home ownership, there's already in Wales, I think up to 3 times, 300% council tax premium on empty second homes. So target the issues, target the places that aren't providing any value to the local communities, and help us to drive more opportunities and more income there. And around the world, you're seeing all of these types of things arise. The US is actually even messier because it's regulated almost at a city or a local area. And that actually is something that we don't support. Luckily, in Europe, you have the European Commission. Here, we've got at least national laws. And the clearer and more sustainable and consistent the laws are at a national level, even if it is opt-in or opt-out for local communities, the easier it is to implement them and see the benefits and measure them.
Craig, what's your take on regulation? Do you want more of it?
Look, at the moment we're in just a free for all. Yeah, it's money wins, and so this is our life. This is how we see our lives. That everything is done to us, and that we have no control over them. So I welcome any regulation, to be honest. At the moment, what's happening here is that what we actually need is a box full of tools to enable us to deal with this, and instead of that, we get the odd tool. As Merilee says, there's very little data on it, so we use that tool and then we wait to see what happens, and there are always unintended consequences. So I agree completely. What we really need is data, and I wonder, is it deliberate that we don't have that data already? Because it can't be hard to collect. And so get the data. But what I really want to see, what we really need to see is, and maybe this is where I don't agree with Merilee, is that we need to see the power and the ability to regulate this devolve down to community levels. Yeah, not that no one in London, no one in Westminster, no one in Cardiff has any idea what it's like.
I was just about, Craig, I was just about to ask you. I was just about to ask you that. Do you feel completely neglected by your leaders on this?
I really can't explain how neglected we feel. Like not a lot. Well, in the 90s, up until the 90s, we were burning houses, yeah, because we were saying we're sick to death of losing our housing stock to people from over the border, and we were burning second homes, yeah. There are people talking about doing that again, and that's where we're at, and I'm obviously completely against that. And any right-minded person would be against that. But that just shows the level of despair and anger that we've arrived at when middle-class people are saying what we need to do is we need to start torching houses again. And of course, look, I have conversations with people in London and people in Cardiff about this, and they, honest to God, have no idea what the situation is here. None whatsoever.
Merilee, they're strong words: neglect, despair, anger across rural Wales.
Yeah, and I think we all agree that we need to get that toolbox, and we need to enable communities to access the tools that they need to be able to get this balance right. But I think where it's worrying as an industry is that, not everyone is as balanced in their thinking as Craig is. And so some people just say, well, we just want to shut down the industry, or we want to, limit the number of licenses. And, the unintended consequences of that in terms of income, jobs, support for local businesses, all of those other things could be massive for those communities. And so we want to make sure that whatever tools are given to local communities, that they are tools that aren't going to backfire and have negative consequences that are going to hurt the local people that they're actually there to help.
Fascinating. That is all we have time for. Merilee Karr, CEO of Under the Doormat, and Craig Iago from Plaid Cymru in Gwynedd in Wales. Thank you both. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.